This video was brought to you by Blinkist. What's up, everybody? Helen here. And that, my friends, is the good news. The bad news is, your trusty parasocial companion Michael Burns is currently under the weather. But he wrote the excellent video you're about to watch. So if it helps to picture me as a millennial dad with a borderline unhealthy fixation on the Grateful Dead, go right ahead. Caveats aside, we're here today to talk about plagiarism, a term which, according to these hastily scrawled notes that Burns left me, gives him flashbacks of students turning in essays co-written by Wikipedia. While it's not a cool thing to do, Burns swears he's a super chill guy who never got too mad about stressed undergrads cutting corners in a required course. He's also not mad at all about the negative comments on his Rate My Professor page, which he definitely did not read compulsively and does not hold grudges about to this day. Recently though, plagiarism has gone from a minor annoyance for worn-out adjunct professors running assignments through Turnitin to a lightning-rod political issue, leading to Harvard President Claudine Gay's resignation.
Claudine Gay announced she's resigning so that our community can navigate this moment of extraordinary challenge.
And forcing a way too online billionaire to become the most embarrassing wife guy of all time.
She referenced 8 other times and properly referenced that person. So again, stick with me, Andrew, it's important, it's my wife.
Meanwhile, YouTube is still reeling from its own plagiarism scandal, in which a video that made Oppenheimer seem like a short film forced several prominent creators off the platform.
Blair could have said, in the Netflix documentary, this person says this, but she'd have to say that 50 times, and it would make it obvious she's just remembering Netflix at you.
Now, while it's tempting to view these scandals through the same lens, the transgressions are distinct. The YouTube creators who found themselves in H-Bomber Guy's crosshairs either invented facts or straight up copy-pasted the work of others. In contrast, Claudine Gay improperly cited sources, a thing many academics are guilty of, and frankly, don't find to be that big of a deal. Outside the proverbial ivory tower, though, America apparently begs to differ. So the question is, why does everyone care so much about plagiarism? Are we all sincerely concerned about academic rigor and scholastic honesty? Or could something way more cynical be going on? And what's more, does focusing on individual cases of plagiarism obscure a much bigger problem? Let's figure it out in this video on plagiarism. Are we missing the point? But before we get into it, I want to talk about this video's sponsor, Blinkist. If you're anything like me, you love reading and learning new things, but every day is so busy and exhausting you feel like you hardly have the time or energy to even pick up a book anymore. If that sounds like you, Blinkist is here to help. Blinkist is an app that allows you to get the most important information from a library of over 6,500 titles that you can read or listen to in just 15 minutes. That means when you're driving to work, waiting for the bus, you can brush up on your philosophy, learn about the future of science, or finally understand what the heck was going on in the great American novels that you definitely read in high school English class. Today, I'm listening to Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism. Is there no alternative? Capitalist Realism discusses how our society is shaped by the constraints of capitalism and explores whether an alternative to capitalism in our society is even possible. We've cited Fisher's work a lot on the channel, so checking out his book on Blinkist is a great way to go even more in depth on his ideas without having to read everything cover to cover. Another feature that Blinkist offers is Blinkist Spaces. This feature allows you to create a space with friends or family where you can recommend titles to each other. All members of a shared space can access all the titles in a space with or without a Blinkist Premium subscription. My New Year's resolution for 2024 was to stop doom scrolling and start doing something productive with my downtime. Easier said than done. But so far so good, because Blinkist is the perfect solution. There are so many fascinating topics to read about and such a massive library of books that it's basically impossible to get bored. If any of this sounds like something you'd be interested in, try out Blinkist for yourself. When you click the link in the description, you'll get a free 7-day trial as well as 25% off Blinkist's annual premium subscription. And now, back to the show. If you've ever had someone pass off your hard work as their own, you know it feels pretty crappy. But it doesn't just feel bad when you get plagiarized. It also feels bad when someone whose work you've supported turns out to be cribbing their content from others. This is why recent revelations about YouTubers like James Somerton and Illuminati were such a bummer. I mean, imagine pouring hundreds of hours of your limited time on this earth into consuming content by someone you've come to consider a trusted digital chum, only to find out that they're completely full of shit. But even though these days all the homies hate plagiarism, it's got a complicated backstory. For a good chunk of Western history, art had more to do with imitation than originality. Works were more or less considered public domain, a sort of common property that everyone was free to copy and adapt. And most classic writers advocated imitation as the best means of developing style, expression, and taste, according to scholar George G. Bulow. Indeed, even Shakespeare cribbed plots, themes, and even lifted entire passages from a potpourri of writers ranging from Plutarch to the long-forgotten George North. That's not to say nobody complained. Indeed, the word plagiarism is derived from the Latin word plagiarius, meaning kidnapper, which was coined by a 1st century Roman poet who was mad that somebody kept copying his lines. Nevertheless, it was still widely accepted, but all this would shift in the 1900s. According to Bolo, it was in 18th century England that the concept of originality as the main force in the creative process in all of the arts received its earliest definitions. Some of this shift was theological. As scholar Carla Hess notes, this came in tandem with the Enlightenment belief that knowledge came from the human mind working upon the senses, rather than through divine revelation, assisted by the study of ancient texts. When all the good ideas come from God, we're willing to share, but when individual humans are responsible, we're more concerned about ownership. This shift from divine inspiration to human creativity gave rise to a newfound emphasis on the genius of the individual artist or writer making something no one else possibly could. And this led folks to question when borrowing themes crosses over into plagiarism of the creative genius. As Bolo explains, the romanticized view of creative accomplishment seems to see the writer, the artist, the composer in a state of suspended animation until he is mysteriously infused with the inspired idea, the original invention. This association of the artist with a unique and mysterious genius made imitation, once a legitimate way of fueling creativity, seem like absolute poser behavior, and plagiarism would come to be treated as a criminal act. One result of this changing mindset was the first major plagiarism scandal, when John Milton was met with accusations in 1747 that his opus Paradise Lost had plagiarized a century-old Latin poem. The claims were eventually dismissed and Milton's genius today is unimpeachable, but this accusation spawned debates about the stakes of plagiarism. By the 19th century, we see the first use of the phrase intellectual property to emphasize creative ownership. The Industrial Revolution led to the birth of an international literary market, which saw creatives rush to secure legal rights to their IP. However, these laws remained gray in the United States. This allowed early US publishing houses to establish themselves by reprinting famous British works without paying for them, a thing they continued doing until penny presses started cutting into their profits and the publishers decided to champion international copyright laws that gave them exclusive publishing rights. By the 1970s, copyright law expanded far beyond literature and art to include all sorts of scientific and medical innovations. To put all this together, Enlightenment thinking changed our view on where ideas come from, individual minds, not a universal God, and who owns them. Combined with an obsession with individual genius and an industrial revolution that made creative industries a global enterprise, the protection of ideas became a lucrative business. In this way, plagiarism came to have less to do with stealing a piece of another's genius and more to do with making money off their ideas, thus depriving them of their livelihood, which rightfully gets us a little ragey since, that's theft. But this still doesn't fully explain the outrage over Claudine Gay's infractions. After all, it's not like anyone makes money from academic writing, so why was this front page news? Well, the answer might have less to do with our cultural and economic views on plagiarism, and more to do with an insidious right-wing plan to undermine and annihilate systems of supposedly liberal and diverse educational institutions across the country, coordinated on the internet and media by a small group of dudes. No, seriously. To understand, we need to start with Claudine Gay's appearance at a December 5th congressional hearing, in which she gave an annoyingly academic answer to a question about anti-Semitism on campus following the October 7th attacks in Israel.
Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment, yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
Depending on who you ask, she was either A, baited into a rhetorical trap by a right-wing congresswoman, B, lacking empathy for Jewish students, or C, was media coached to death and lost the threat. Let us know what your answer is in the comments. Regardless, her response created the perfect opportunity for those who already saw her as a harbinger of DEI doom to leverage the bad PR to force her resignation. In the weeks that followed, Gay's academic history was put under the microscope. Reports about her previous acts of plagiarism came out, most prominently on the Substack of Italian-American nightmare Christopher Rufo, and in the Washington Free Beacon, a publication with the tagline, "Covering the enemies of freedom the way the mainstream media won't." The accusations against Gay ranged from leaving out quotation marks on passages from sources she had previously cited, to cribbing whole phrases from other people's work. We won't get into the details here, but it's been covered widely and we'll throw some links in the description. The best source is the paper that Rory Gilmore wished she'd edited, the Harvard Crimson. As the Crimson explains, a Harvard webpage titled "What Constitutes Plagiarism" says that when copying language word for word from another source, scholars must give credit to the author of the source material, either by placing the source material in quotation marks and providing a clear citation, or by paraphrasing the source material and providing a clear citation. To be clear, the passage I just read is a quote from the Crimson article that also quotes a Harvard webpage. So regardless of the bad faith motives of the accusations against Gay, it seems that by Harvard standards, which as president she was responsible for enforcing, she committed plagiarism. But many disagree with the letter of Ivy League law, including several of the scholars she stole from. As Alex F. Schwartz writes, in my opinion, this excerpt in no way constitutes any resemblance to plagiarism. The text merely presents well-founded facts about the low-income housing tax credit. In other words, the ideas she allegedly plagiarized was such common knowledge, she was no more stealing it from him than from the collective consciousness. Another scholar she plagiarized, D. Stephen Voss, wrote that if intellectual property theft can be represented by picking someone's pocket and keeping hundreds of dollars, this was like thoughtlessly grabbing a nickel or ballpoint pen off my desk, figuring I wouldn't miss it. Although, considering that's undoubtedly more than he made on the research, he might actually want to hang on to that nickel. But even if the scholars involved feel chill about it, the facts are clear. As Christopher Sprigman writes in New York Magazine, most of the allegations against Gay involved low-grade misconduct, like crediting sources but failing to put copied passages in quotes. In several instances, though, Gay went further, reproducing more lengthy passages without any attribution at all. So, like the previously mentioned YouTube plagiarizers, Gay is guilty. But unlike our digital copycats who made money off the stolen words of marginalized folks, Gay's transgressions were so low stakes that other academics, including those she stole from, weren't too pressed about it. So why has her case been covered in every major newspaper across every news network and retweeted to death? Well, for that we can thank the previously mentioned Christopher Rufo and billionaire wife guy Bill Ackman. This ain't Rufo's first rodeo. He's one of the folks who turned CRT and DEI into cultural boogeymen. Check out our videos on both CRT and DEI for more context. He's a genius, albeit the evil kind, at taking an obscure academic issue that most folks don't care about and turning it into a political flashpoint. And much like no one cared about CRT outside of law schools, we can presume most folks didn't give a crap about the plagiarism standards for tenured academics until recently. And if you think we're projecting insidious intent onto Rufo, the guy isn't shy about what he's trying to do, and how he's trying to do it. He described his campaign against Gay as a textbook example of successful conservative activism. After describing how he grew the story on social media and in the conservative press, he noted that he still had to get the narrative into the left-wing media. He did so by engaging in a thoughtful and substantive campaign of shaming and bullying my colleagues on the left until they took the story seriously.
Oh my God! He admitted!
While Rufo isn't subtle, he might be outdone by Bill Ackman, the Harvard grad and Wall Street billionaire who made taking down Ivy League presidents his pet project after the congressional hearings. He went from never mentioning his deep concerns about academic plagiarism to being militantly obsessed with ruining Gay's career to arguing that, well, actually it's a complicated issue, after Business Insider put out a report showing that Ackman's wife, former MIT professor and designer Neri Oxman, copied big chunks of her PhD dissertation from Wikipedia.
And I don't know today whether Claudine Gay committed plagiarism or not, because I haven't done a 6-month assessment of.
But you were out there on Twitter saying she plagiarized. She shouldn't. Not only should she not be the president of the university, when in fact she stepped down and they made her a member of the faculty. You raised questions about that based on the plagiarism accusation itself.
While both Gay and Oxman did plagiarism, at least Gay's method of PhD research didn't involve opening up Wikipedia.com and hitting copy and paste over and over during her lunch break. But even if the attacks on Gay were made in bad faith, motivated more by grudges than justice, they worked. And they worked not because the public is invested in the precision of political science scholarship, but because hearing about people cheating or being dishonest in their work makes us very, very mad. We got into this in our video on cheating, where we talked about why we're often more willing to forgive criminals than someone who cheats on a partner. Now, as we've seen, the Enlightenment emphasis on individual genius turned plagiarism into an emotionally charged issue, and we might worry about how plagiarism harms others, which makes it one of the moral offenses that gets us disproportionately pissed off, even when no one has been materially harmed. Rufo and co. understand this and have weaponized our innate emotional reaction against plagiarism to harm their ideological enemy. And this isn't an isolated event, but rather a repeatable strategy that can be used against other academics.
You were critical in unmasking this Gay lady as a fraud, and people are criticizing you for saying you got a scalp. Is this something that you're going to continue to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be continuing to work on my scalp collection.
As Rufo recently said, I've run the same playbook on critical race theory, on gender ideology, on DEI bureaucracy. This is a universal strategy that can be applied by the right to most issues. Plagiarism fits perfectly into Rufo's playbook, as it takes an obscure academic issue most folks don't know anything about, adds heightened emotion and ingrained cultural norms, and uses it to create political pressure. And to be clear, they themselves admit that they don't particularly care about plagiarism or the details of academic research. They simply saw an opportunity to foment anger against woke academic institutions and ran with it. And they have every intention, it seems, to rinse and repeat. So while plagiarism being a new political weapon for the far right might make any left-leaning academic worried about the one time they borrowed a little too generously from a book that no one else has read, is it something the rest of us need to worry about? Is the anger about plagiarism by academics and YouTubers alike actually justified? Well, we think, and we hope to God that this is an original idea, that we may indeed be right to be both worried and mad about plagiarism, but not for the reasons you might think. Because to think that plagiarism is primarily a problem of single individuals unfairly using the work of others misses how plagiarism is increasingly becoming a structural issue in our society. Take academia. Ian Bogost, a scholar who carried out a plagiarism investigation against himself in The Atlantic, tweeted that original thought in academia is becoming extremely rare. This is because, as Bogost puts it, scholarship is mostly careerist incrementalism. That is to say, a majority of published academic research just summarizes previously existing scholarship with a slightly new framing or some minor new question or theory tacked on. While you can't immediately discern what's been stolen with a Google search, this hardly meets our exalted originality criteria. It's like cooking a recipe from one of Bobby Flay's cookbooks, adding 1 or 2 new ingredients, and then telling your friends to come over to try the amazing new dish you developed. The very structures of academia encourage this sort of soft plagiarism, as this type of piggybacking research enables you to publish at a quick clip, which can help you secure an increasingly rare tenure-track job. Now, given his past life as a philosophy professor, this wasn't exactly breaking news for our pal Michael Burns. One of the reasons he left academia was to escape this sort of careerist incrementalism. See, if you get all your good ideas out in your dissertation and need to spend a decade reading to have something really new to say, your job description requires you to constantly produce new research, publish or perish, that is, whether you have anything original to say or not. This forces you to put out research that, though it may not be copied and pasted from Wikipedia, isn't adding anything necessary to the conversation. We see a version of this all over the internet, with countless websites and aggregation hubs running lightly rephrased versions of the same stories, all in a quest to get clicks. As we've already discussed, this has turned plagiarism into a common occurrence on YouTube, and it's banal by now to see people stealing jokes and weird tweets and posting them as their own, presumably motivated by the endless drive for clout and clicks. These instances of soft to medium plagiarizing are arguably a side effect of folks trying to eke out careers in increasingly precarious industries while keeping up with the digital world's ravenous hunger for more and more and more content. Slow down for a second and risk obscurity. Whether you're a sociology professor, a video creator, a film critic, or a comedian, jobs aren't exactly growing on trees these days. And in some of these cases, plagiarizing may genuinely be accidental. Kleptomnesia is a term for unconsciously plagiarizing others via our memory, i.e. when we confuse something we've read or seen elsewhere as an original idea. This is common in music, even afflicting George Harrison, who, when penning what's surely the only Hare Krishna smash hit, My Sweet Lord, in 1970, copied the melody of 1963 banger He's So Fine by the Chiffons. Harrison was baffled as to how he could have unknowingly plagiarized such a huge hit. Organizational psychologist Adam Grant explains that kleptomnesia happens due to a pragmatic but peculiar feature of how human memory is wired. When we encode information, we tend to pay more attention to the content than the source. Once we accept a piece of information as true, we no longer need to worry about where we acquired it. This might happen when we inadvertently copy a hit song or present our coworker's idea to our boss as our own, and then benefit by gaining money or accolades off of someone else's labor. So are we all doomed to accidentally steal from each other without realizing it, creating a vicious cycle of plagiarism that destroys any semblance of original thought and creative ownership? Maybe, but that still isn't the biggest problem by our estimations, because increasingly, the most egregious plagiarism isn't being done by overworked news aggregators or by hungover musicians. Things are getting way weirder with the rapid growth of AI companies like ChatGPT, whose parent company OpenAI has recently said that it's impossible for them to create useful AI models without using copyrighted material. In other words, the technology that's supposed to change our world needs to plagiarize to do so. Generative AI systems need to take our work to come up with datasets. And what's to stop these systems from telling jokes like John Mulaney, creating art like Banksy, or writing songs like Nick Cave?
I have no idea what's gonna happen next. And neither do any of you, and neither do your parents, because there's a horse loose in the hospital. It's never happened before.
ChatGPT actually did write a Nick Cave song, and Nick Cave f***ing hated it. Generative AI isn't plagiarizing in the traditional sense, i.e. copying someone's words and presenting them as one's own.
Brock and I were raised with so many of the same values. Like, you work hard for what you want in life.
From a young age, my parents impressed on me the values that you work hard for what you want in life.
Instead, they're plagiarizing the essence or creative consciousness of individuals and brands. This leads to absolute abominations like the recent AI-produced George Carlin special. And while instrumentalizing a deceased legend to create bad AI comedy might seem more distasteful than terrifying, it should cause concern that generative AI can use our online data to create versions of our very selves.
But if you want to drive with your head in your ass and blame it on the car, you have to have a Tesla.
We already have companies using data to create avatars of deceased loved ones, and AI-generated deepfakes are increasingly hard to detect. So what's to stop someone from creating a digital version of you? By comparison, this makes lifting a passage from a book or plagiarizing a video script seem like a grain of sand on a dystopian beach. Rather than worrying about academics copying and pasting paragraphs on obscure topics in journals no one reads to get tenure, we might need to worry about the much bigger threat of powerful tech companies gathering enough of our data to, well, plagiarize our very humanity. And don't even get me started on how that could be used as a political tool because, well, it is way too early in the day for me to start drinking. But what do you think? Should we be taking plagiarism of all sorts more seriously? Or is the current debate just thinly veiled ideological warfare? And is the real concern a coming era of large-scale digital plagiarism that will steal our souls? Let us know what you think in the comments. Want to give a huge thanks to all of our patrons, as always. If you're interested in watching our videos early without ads, or checking out some of our bonus content, or just supporting us so that we can keep doing what we do best without pandering to the algorithm, check out our Patreon page via the link in the description. As always, thanks again to everyone for liking, commenting, subscribing, and all that fun stuff. Your support means the world to us. I'll catch you later, but in the meantime, please don't copy and paste this video and re-upload for those sweet, sweet AdSense dollars. Peace!